Science has been telling you for almost 40 years now that we can manually go from stress to rest if we start breathing deeply and slowly. So just like going back to getting rocked in the rocking chair by your grandmother and all of a sudden your pain's gone, that's what the touch does. So it's almost like we have to be our own wise grandmother with our own stress, a deeper level of wellness. And when you practice it every day with us, for 20 minutes, it sets a tone in your body because you're actually doing that behavior. You're living that life. Life is like the ocean and stress sucks us out to sea. The answer is within you, and I encourage you to invest inside yourself. You are your best investment.
Welcome to another episode of Nourify Beautify, the podcast that shows you the other side of beauty. Every week, we interview the experts in the world of beauty, health, and wellness so that you can make an informed decision that are right for you. My name is Noura Bouchama.
And I'm Linda Yates. This week, we have an incredible guest, Brett Cotter. Brett is the founder of Stress Is Gone. Don't you love that name? Nora, I think it's awesome. This is a transformative program designed to help people release trauma, reduce anxiety, and reclaim inner peace. With over 20 years of experience in stress relief coaching, his methods have empowered countless individuals to break free from the grip of fear and stress. Get ready for an enlightening conversation packed with practical strategies to help you stress less and live more.
If this is your first time listening to Nourify and Beautify, welcome. We're so happy to have you. If this isn't your first time, we hope you'll follow or subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast app and share the show with someone who can benefit from all of the amazing knowledge. Now, let's get into the interview. Brett, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
I'm really excited to hear about your journey and and overcome all the obstacles you had and to know what led you to do the work you're doing today. So we're really excited to have you on the show today.
I'm excited to share my story, how I got into the work, and also some tools that your viewers can use to help them release stress, release anxiety, and actually heal old traumatic memories.
That's pretty powerful. You've developed some specific techniques for stress relief. What was that turning point in your life that made you focus on this field?
So when I was 27, back in 1999, I got into meditation and I realized I had a pattern, and my pattern involved my relationships with women. And I realized after the 18-month mark in relationships, I would become very jealous. So when I was 27, I realized, okay, I have this issue and I wanted to work on it. Long story short, I got referred to an emotional healer from Sedona, Arizona. And that weekend I drove out to see him from California. So I had a session with him, and inside that session is where my life turned around. So I sat down with him. He asked me a few questions, and then the memory from when I was 5 years old bubbled up from my cellular memory inside my body. And I was watching my parents argue when I was 5. And when that memory came up, I started to feel all those jealous feelings bubble up in my body as well. And then once the jealousy started to release, then the anger underneath the jealousy came up. When that released, the sadness came up. And when the sadness released, the fear of abandonment came up. And when that released, I broke free from the core trauma inside of me, and jealousy never ruined another relationship in my life after that point in time. Now, that was in 1999, so I'm not great at math, but probably around 25, 26 years ago. And that's where everything turned around for me. And ever since that session, I had a desire to get to understand this work, what happened in that session, and to understand what was the transformative energy that changed everything for me on that day. So I was like a moth to a flame to that work. I followed and learned from that gentleman for about 3 to 4 years. I learned from a Shaolin Grandmaster from China. I learned from the founder of Theta Healing, Viana Stiebel, and I learned from a few other really good teachers that helped me between 2000 and 2003 craft my own process. And then ever since then, I started teaching and coaching. So that's kind of how everything got started.
Okay. Now, you said it's a personal experience. Who drove you to this direction? Because you felt it, and it was a master who you had a session with. And then you learned from different masters. Everyone has their own technique, everyone have their own way of doing them. If we want to talk a little bit about the science behind the stress relief, your method combines what I've seen from what you're doing, like breath work, mantra, stress relief. Can you explain how each of these elements significantly contributes to the stress reduction?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So, our first technique that we had certified by the American Institute of Stress is called stress stopper breath work. It combines the touch, the breath, and mantra all together at the same time to activate our relaxation response. And usually that happens in 60 seconds. Once the relaxation response kicks in, our fight or flight reaction gets disengaged because you can't be relaxed and stressed at the same time. So, what I found is the first step is touch. So, anytime you get stressed out, you touch the tension. And we could just run through this together so we could build some muscle memory for the technique. And then we could use it if we want to go when we're going to bed at night or when we get stressed out during the day. So, the simple technique is just touch the tension when you get stressed out. For me, it's usually my chest and my heart. The second step is start breathing deeply and slowly. And the third step is once per breath, silently say, I'm okay. Now I'll say it out loud. And if you could just say it on your own, and it's usually like once every 6 or 8 seconds. So I'll begin. We'll do 3 breaths. I'm okay. And I really want you to feel the airflow coming in through your nose, cooling off the energy behind your eyes, going down your throat. I'm okay. Feeling the airflow come in through the nose, go down the throat, now circulating throughout the chest. Now, that was only 3 breaths, right? So you can imagine if you do this 20 times in a row. On the third breath, I felt my heart rate settle down a little bit. My shoulders dropped a little bit. Did either of you feel anything on the third breath?
Yeah, I think so. I've never been really the one who would do neither yoga or anything, so I might
Mhm.
be a harder one.
So for folks that have never done it before, or breath work or yoga or meditation, by the 10th to 20th breath, you absolutely will feel your heart rate slow down and you usually start to feel your body starts to unlock where it's holding tension, right? Linda, did you notice your heart rate slow down a little bit on the third?
I did. In full disclosure, I broke my wrist 3 weeks ago, and so I've been having a lot of pain. And so I tried to focus and I touched my cast and by the third breath, I started to feel a little bit of relief from that. So I did notice that as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, again, that's only 3 breaths. So, how does this work, right? Science has been telling us for almost 40 years now that we can manually go from stressed to rest if we start breathing deeply and slowly, right? There's numerous studies on that. That's a fact, right? So, the touch has also been studied. There's healing techniques called quantum touch. I always go back to when I was young and I was like 5 years old and I fell and I scraped my knee and I was bleeding. And then my grandmother would grab me and pull me into her rocking chair and just rock me back and forth for a few minutes. And after like 2 or 3 minutes, the tears would just stop and the pain would be gone. So there is a transference of energy when the calm cells in our hand touch the tense cells in our body. There's a transference of energy. So the stress starts to equal out. There's an equilibrium and every cell on the planet is pre-programmed for homeostasis. So this is an excuse for our cells to go back into homeostasis when it connects with calm cells, right? So just like going back to getting rocked in the rocking chair by your grandmother and all of a sudden your pain's gone and then you could go run out there and play again, that's what the touch does. So it's almost like we have to be our own wise grandmother with our own stress to kind of embrace it with the touch. Breathe into it deeply and slowly, imagining the airflow moving right through the tension. And the third step, the mantra, mantras have been used across all different continents for thousands of years, right? And the mantra is very powerful when you say, I'm okay, because it's the opposite logic of our body's fight or flight reaction. The logic that built our fight or flight reaction is I must run or fight to stay alive. So the cells in your body that are tense when you get stressed, those are the cells that are holding the deeper cellular memory that got activated by that trigger. This is unresolved trauma inside your body. When you touch those cells that are in fear, that are traumatized, you're connecting, right? Just like the wise old grandmother, you're connecting, you're loving, you are consoling. And then when you're breathing deeply and slowly, the cell wall, when we are stressed, is very thick. It's hard for air to get through there. Once we touch it, it starts to return to its normal state so air can respirate and can get into the cell. So as we're breathing deeply and slowly and touching and embracing the tension, the airflow starts to get into that tight cell, those tight areas, and then the mantra is just the icing on the cake. So when those cells hear your brain, your mind saying, I'm okay, the cells feel connected and they have the life force energy of the breath, there's no reason for them to be stressed anymore because it has the connection, it has the thought in the mantra, right? And it has the life force. So that's all stress is looking for,
That's
those
so
three things.
fascinating. So what kind of research supports the effectiveness of these techniques?
So in 2012, when I approached the American Institute of Stress to get the technique certified, so Dr. Kirsch, he actually was on a partnered research project with the guy, Hans Seeley, who actually founded the word stress. He created the word stress. So it's amazing the lineage of the American Institute of Stress. So Dr. Kirsch said, this is a great technique, but you have to create the science. You have to deliver me the science so I could certify this. And I said politely, I said, sir, every time I spoke with somebody about doing a clinical trial, it was about $300,000 to run a clinical trial, right? So I'm focusing on helping people with deep emotional pain. I don't have the funding or the time to run a clinical trial. And he said, okay, well, here's what you could do if you can't run your own clinical trial. You could compile science that backs up each of these steps. So that's what I did. I researched for, this is going back in 2012, so I don't have all the proper citing now, but I had to properly cite studies and summarize them and research for the touch, for the breath, and for the mantra. Now, I'm the first person to combine all three of those techniques together in one technique. And that's what I feel the beautiful aspect to that technique and the simplicity really, but really the efficiency of how well it works, right? And often I teach people to practice at night when you're going to bed so your body gets the muscle memory for the technique. And then every time you're really stressed out, just touch the tension, breathe deeply and slowly, and then once per breath, silently say, I'm okay, until all the stress melts away, until you feel it leave your body.
But how these methods compare to traditional therapy or medication for anxiety or trauma?
So I don't think this technique would compare to therapy, right? Because therapy is, you're sitting down with somebody. Therapy could go on for 5 or 10 years. This is a self-care technique that actually is a Jedi mind trick for an act of self-love, right? So people are searching far and wide to find this self-love. And what this technique does, it puts it right in the palm of your hand, right? And it puts you back in the driver's seat. And when I teach these techniques to people that have anxiety attacks or phobias, let's say there's a few clients that came to me that they had phobias around driving over a bridge, right? So what I did with them, I guided them through imagery and had them do stressed upper breath work while they were driving over a bridge with their eyes closed. So when the panic comes up, we embrace it, they express their feelings, and then they come back to the breath. So we did that for about 15 minutes, and then they drove over a bridge without having anxiety. And all they did was they focused their mind on their breathing. So once you show the brain one image where you can do it, and then you start to wire it into the body with the breath and the touch, Now the cells in your body are starting to get the message, and then you could go back to it and use it. So I don't think this is really a comparable technique for therapy, right? Or medication, because sometimes we need medication, right? If we're going through a period of dark depression or suicidal ideation, just like if we break our leg, we need crutches for 4 weeks, right? So there will be times in our lives where we may need medication, right? I just don't happen to think it's for the rest of our lives, especially for mental health, because the way I've understood it and the way I've experienced it is if I go back to myself and I nurture myself through self love practices like this, I start to embody my true identity over time. And every time I come back to myself, I get to know myself a little bit more. And it's like the clouds start to part from who I really am. And then I start to realize, like, okay, I am safe. And once we start to realize that we're safe, we realize that we don't need things on the outside, that we already have things on the inside. It just takes time to nurture that realization.
So, and we can say it's like, for example, we can compare it to your day skin routine. But if you have an outbreak, you need to go to a doctor. So we can have this comparison.
I feel this technique is a great complement to your therapist, your coach, your mental health provider, whatever you're going through, learning how to breathe and bringing your awareness to your body and touching the tension is only going to help you, right? I don't claim it to be a fix all for everything, but it's just going to help you and it's going to be a great addition to anything you have in your mental health or your emotional health repertoire.
I have a couple questions for you, Brett. The first question is, how can you determine where that stress is in your body? And then the follow-up question would be, are there any misconceptions people have about stress relief techniques that you'd like to address?
Yeah. So for me, the more you start to tune into your body, the easier it gets. So sometimes if you haven't really thought about how your body's feeling, it's a little foreign at first. But I'll tell you this, every time you get an emotional trigger, let's say your spouse, the kids, a supervisor, a colleague, a repetitive emotional trigger, we call that routine stress. The stressors that are happening routinely week in and week out. That emotional trigger, it's a personal stress. It's not like you're sitting in traffic and your back starts to hurt, right? This is an emotional trigger. When you have an emotional trigger, you will be able to feel where the tension is. Usually it's in the central column of your body. Usually it's what people refer to as the chakras, right? Typically it's the heart, the solar plexus, the stomach, or the throat. Sometimes people feel stress in their eyes and their face. Sometimes they feel it in their neck or their shoulders. You can feel stress anywhere. Sometimes people feel it in their spine. Where your stress is located tells me the story about what feelings are stored in there. So if you have stress at work with a supervisor and you find that your throat gets tense when your stress triggers from your supervisor, if your throat gets tense, that means there's cellular memory in there of a past time where you knew what you wanted to say, but you held it back anyway. This goes into not speaking your truth. If it's in your stomach, you know how some people might have anxiety Sunday night or Monday morning, and it's in their stomach. It's like a pit right in the middle of your stomach. That comes from years of pushing our feelings down. That's why in our country we have so many digestive issues because we don't know what to do with our feelings. We push them down, right? So in the coaching that I do and in our retreats, we gently unpack all those feelings and issues in our digestion work themselves out almost immediately because all these issues have been waiting for an outlet. We never knew how easy it could be. And going to your other question around misconceptions, I think the biggest one is that the answer is outside of you. If you just think about stressed out or breath work, just go to sleep doing the technique, touching your heart, one hand on your belly button, grounding, laying down on your back, closing your eyes, and just practice it for 5 or 10 minutes before you go to sleep, saying, I'm okay. You could also say, I'm alive. Any mantra that you really like that is opposite of the fight or flight logic. And it also helps you get to sleep quickly. So I feel like that's the biggest misconception, that we need something outside of ourselves. All I do in my coaching and in our retreats is I guide you to that place inside of you that is connected with eternal peace. that's like underneath all the emotional waves. And when you get there, it's a beautiful place to experience, and you could get back to it because once you found it, you could get back there anytime you want.
But in today's world, self care is often commercialized. How do we differentiate self care from customer driven wellness trends? I believe this is a big problem.
So I feel self-care is exactly what it says, and to me, it's an act of self-love, right? For me, like, if I have a pain in my hip, I put my hand right there, I start breathing deeply and slowly, and I start to listen to it and see what it feels like. Does it feel like an electrical pain, like a nerve, or does it feel like a throbbing pain? And I start to just listen to it, feel it. Does it feel like an emotion? If you tune into a pain inside your body, and you start you use your imagination to breathe into that pain, it starts to get bigger, but in a good way. It starts to expand. It's like untying a knot. And as you untie it, everything gets bigger, but it gets softer and it gets more diluted and more manageable until it releases. So going back to like the self-care model, some corporate models, I feel any model that brings us back to ourselves is great, right? Is great. And we have to invest in ourselves. Often I meet so many people that are downtrodden, that are super depressed, that feel like they can't afford help. And I just usually just say, like, look, when your car's check engine light turns on, do you go bring it to the mechanic? Does the mechanic ever tell you, guess what? It's free today? Right? Ever, right? So some places, right? And if you're lucky enough to get to the right place, I was in 1999, right? I beelined it. I knew I needed help. I wanted help, and I drove from Southern California to Arizona that weekend to get the help. And boy, was help waiting for me right there, right? So I encourage people that are going through it to give this healthcare that I teach a shot. And if it's not working, then try the coaching, right? In one coaching session, it's 1 hour. We go into your childhood and we clear up so much stuff between any traumatic memories and any painful relationships with the parent that you wanted more from as a child. Once that pain leaves, you start to see life in a whole new way. It's like we get a new lease on life. So I encourage people to give it a chance and to take a little leap of faith, because what you might find might be your real self that was waiting there the entire time. And that's what this is all about for me, coming back to our true nature.
So, Brett, how does stress and unresolved trauma affect physical appearance and aging? Or actually, a coworker I was just, or one of my clients I was just speaking to the other day, she said seasoning. I like that word instead of aging,
Is
seasoning.
that is a great way to look at it. I feel like I'm marinating. So we have this a veteran and veteran and retired first responder, Patrick, that comes to a lot of our retreats. And every time at the last day, he's always saying, look at everyone's faces, because everyone's faces, they're like glowing, right? The happiness and the joy is back. So stress has a hyper fast forward effect on how we age. Stress, if you think of the DNA, like that double helix, there's these caps on the ends of our DNA called telomeres, and it's almost like the cap on your shoelace, right? It's like that little plastic cap, but stress eats away at that cap. And then what do you think happens to our DNA? It starts to unravel. Okay. That's why stress gives us wrinkles. That's why stress weakens our back and our spine. And you might find as you're aging, like you're hunching over. I want to say this was the most profound thing I found about self care and aging. There was a study done, I believe it was 15 years ago. You could find it online, for meditators that have been meditating for over 5 years, right? That have been meditating every day for over 5 years. Under a microscope, their cells were 12 plus years younger than their biological age.
Wow.
So their physical age, right, of their cells looked 12 plus years younger than their actual biological age. So I always joke around when people are like, oh, looking for the fountain of youth. You're sitting on it. Just sit down and meditate. because after 5 years, you're gonna start to, slow down the aging process and actually reverse it. So it's really amazing when you get into it.
When I hear you, you worked with a lot of people from all walks of life. What's the most powerful transformations you've ever witnessed?
The most powerful transformations are the one that I experienced with that healer in Sedona, Arizona with myself. And then there was a few other ones, and it was with people that were suffering from suicidal ideation when I was in person with them and they kept their eyes open. So typically when I'm working with people around the world, we'll be over the phone. We have earbuds on and they're laying down and I'm laying down in bed as well. And I am listening to my higher guidance as to what to say, and then they repeat it. As they repeat it, the pain starts to unlock and release from their body. Now, when I was with a few folks over the last 25 years that were suffering with severe suicidal ideation, and we were face to face, and they kept their eyes open and we locked eyes, they actually saw the light. One person saw light coming through my eye into their eye, and then another saw light coming through my throat. And that was like a life-changing moment for them. That was like everything that led to their suicidal ideation, their depression. It almost like the light cut through the illusion of everything we experienced and brought us back to the moment of the truth of who we are. And when I saw that healer in Sedona, Arizona in 1999, I saw that light. So sometimes there's a light transmission, and that is the most powerful transformation. And the first one I had was with a guy in 2005, a client, and now he has 3 kids, has retired since from a great career, and his pain was from job stress and a relationship breakup. So his life totally transformed, and I feel like all of us are just waiting for this amazing turnaround story, like a transformation story. And at any time, we could grab it and we could take it and we could start living that life that we always know in the back of our mind, that we always wanted, that we always saw, you know? So I'm a big believer in the dream and focusing your behaviors on living what you want. Because when you focus your behaviors on living what you want, you actually have that life. You just have to start behaving in that way. So I'll give you an example. The both of you host this awesome podcast, right? You might have had the idea for a few years, I want to do a podcast, but you didn't do it until you started doing it. And then once you started doing it, it was in your life. So I always talk to people about the behavioral change and the folks that are going through a lot of emotional pain. We let go of that old emotional pain that we've been walking around with for decades that have been blocking us from the life that we want.
How do people maintain long-term progress after employing some of your techniques?
So it's typically through the self-care tools. I just showed you one of them. We have a book called The Stress Is Gone Method. It's on Amazon. It has 10 techniques in it, and they all build upon each other. So the first technique, stressed upper breath work, it's super basic. Then we start to talk about how to release emotional pain. Then we go into the anxiety freedom technique that releases your anxiety. I mean, like deep guttural anxiety within 3 or 4 minutes. Then we go into healing traumatic memories. And then towards the end of the book, we go into this technique called the belief embodiment technique, where you release all the beliefs that are holding you back that we absorbed from childhood. And then you embody the new beliefs that automatically manifest your destiny and your dreams, the life that you want to live, so that your thoughts are supporting you subconsciously. And it makes that transition a lot easier. So, to answer your question,
Yeah.
the techniques would be the simple self-care technique. That's how people continue nurturing the healing that happens in a retreat or a coaching session. And then they would get the book, but we also have a membership where my wife and I, we teach in it 5 days a week. So the membership is $15 a month, and then it gives you half off on all coaching and our other products. And then you're in there. You have 25 live relaxation sessions with myself doing the meditation and my wife doing the movement. And together, the movement and the meditation anchor in a deeper level of wellness. And when you practice it every day with us for 20 minutes, it sets a tone in your body because you're actually doing that behavior. You're living that life where you're nurturing it. And to me, it's like gardening. If you have a garden in your backyard, every day you go out there, you find a little weed, you pull it out, you sprinkle some water in there, you might put some fertilizer down. mm, And that's what the membership does. That's what the daily self care does. If you don't do it daily, life is like the ocean and stress sucks us out to sea, right? With this undertow and riptides all the time, right? Life will just continue to put stress in front of us. And if you don't have the, I can handle it, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to do stressed upper breath work to melt that stress away and then address that situation with clarity, right? If we don't have that, life is going to do what it does and it just stresses us out, right? If you turn on the news or you go to like a big family event or something happens, right? Personal health or something's happening in our family, life is always stressing us out. It's how do we handle it and how do we face it?
You've also trained other professionals. What qualities make someone successful in teaching these techniques?
So, in teaching the technique to someone else, and I have people from all walks of life come into our certification programs. I certify people in our techniques, right, just for themselves, for the self care. Then I certify people to become suicide prevention specialists. Then I certify people to become trauma recovery coaches. And then I certify meditation teachers. Now, what makes me good at training and teaching is that my first job out of college, and they promoted me to trainer in about 11 months. So I've been training people since 1998, right? And I've trained people and kids. So I also coached young kids, 5-year-old kids in soccer, football, baseball, and was an assistant coach in wrestling. And then I coach high school kids in varsity football. And then I coach middle school kids in basketball. And when I say coached, I mean I created playbooks, practice scripts, game plans, and then I had to teach them how to ingrain that into their body and their mind so they could deliver in games, right? So what makes me a good trainer is that I've trained in the corporate setting. I've trained youth and high school kids. I've also trained guidance counselors in high schools and teachers how to do these techniques with students. And then I train people in the wellness side. So my training background is very broad. And that's what I feel helps me learn the most important thing about training somebody is not telling them anything because my words don't matter. The only thing that matters is what they remember. And what people when they really remember something, it's when they had the realization themselves. So as a trainer, my job is to create a safe learning environment that's fun. And then I ask them questions to bring up the realization from within them. So they realize they had that light bulb moment like, oh, I get it now. It means this. And then I'm like, you're right. You got it. So that's my job as a trainer is to bring the technique, bring the experience out from within them so they own it.
You've worked with both individuals and corporation. Do you see a shift in how workplaces are addressing mental health?
I find that it comes in waves throughout the year. Around Mental Health Month, corporations start calling us like crazy, like, come in, can you do these classes? So we get very busy leading up to then throughout the year, it kind of dips down. If something happens, if something's newsworthy, if corporations want to attach themselves to the idea of mental health, emotional well-being, workplace well-being, then those corporations kind of like ingrain it into their culture, which is amazing. But I feel it's tough because corporations run on money. And often when you're making decisions based on money, you forget that people is what makes you money. And if the people are healthy, then the company will be more profitable and prosperous because when people are calm, they are more creative. When they are stressed, their creation solutions to problems, the creative solutions to problems goes out the window when they're stressed and they go into survival mode. So a lot of people in corporations are unconsciously in survival mode, right? Especially when companies go through layoffs or going through some changes, right? Because our bodies are always worried about the worst case scenario. When company goes through layoffs and you're sitting there at your desk and you are stressed, it's not because you're worried you might be laid off. Your cells are actually worried of the worst case scenario. So what's the worst case scenario if you get laid off? Can't find another job. What's the worst case scenario of not finding another job? Can't pay your mortgage. What's the worst case scenario of not paying your mortgage? You're on the street. What's the worst case scenario of being on the street? Dying homeless on the street. That's what your cells are worried about every single time. So the fear of death is the ultimate and lowest level stress that's causing all the stress that we experience in our body.
With all this stress, if you could leave our listeners with one message about stress relief or self love, what would it be?
The answer is within you, and I encourage you to invest inside yourself. You are your best investment. Because if you put other people first above you, I don't care if it's your husband, your wife, your spouse, your kids, your job, your parents, if you put anything ahead of you and you make something else number one, everyone around you is going to get a second-rate version of you. And the only way you could bring your best self to your life is by nurturing that self-love through acts of self-care every single day, whether it's 5 minutes a day. So if you do that technique, touch the tension, breathe deeply and slowly, once per breath, silently say I'm okay when you're going to bed at night for 5 minutes, and then you practice it when you get stressed out during the day, that act of self-care is going to start to nurture the self-love in you. And that's when life becomes sweet again. So my message is the answer is inside of you. Turn towards everything you are running from. When we get stressed out, we start running to the gym. We want to go to the doctor. We want to go to the yoga class. Just turn around and start walking towards everything you are running from. Embrace those emotions with your breath. Breathe into it, express yourself, and come back to the present moment. You can do it. That's my message.
This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. It was so great to be on with both of you. It was amazing questions. Thank you for putting the time in and for the invite. And I would love to come back if you ever want to have me back. It was great.
Of course. Thank you so much for having the time to meet with us. We love your techniques and I'm sure we're going to try them.
Awesome. I love hearing that.
It was great speaking to Brett. I think the most I took away from what he said, during most of the time I was like, it's easier said than done. Love yourself more and put yourself first. I think that's hard for everyone. We all put our loved ones ahead of us. But I think there is a point there to really love yourself so everyone can get the first version of you, not the second one.
That's a really great point. I guess the thing about that is it comes back to if you've ever been on an airplane and you've heard the flight attendant say, give yourself oxygen first before you can put oxygen on those you love. And I think that is sometimes hard to remember, but it is important. I guess my biggest takeaway is that all these things that occur in our life, they do hit us on a cellular level. And being able to recognize that, I appreciate the exercise and the fact that if we can move from the fight or flight, but just kind of live with that emotion and just breathe through it and let ourselves know that we are going to be okay. I think that was very powerful. We want to thank each one of you for listening to Nourify and Beautify, where we show you the other side of beauty. If you want more information about us or to read our blog, check us out at nourify-beautify.com. I'm Linda Yates.
And I'm Laura Bushano. See you next time.